caller of the meeting. There's a number you can call to be put back on. The number is 226-387-0003. If you're back within 10 minutes, we'll wait. We have quorum. We'll continue without you. You can always come back onto the call whenever you want. I don't think anything's going in camera tonight, so we're okay. That's pretty much it. Everyone's clear on the format. First thing to do tonight would be to take attendance, and Councillor Wheat.
Present.
Yep. Councillor McAlpine.
Present.
Councillor LaFerriere.
Here.
Councillor Howes.
Present.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
Councillor Pierce.
Present.
Councillor Chambers.
Right here.
Councillor Miller. Is Councillor Coleman here?
Here.
Oh, Councillor Coleman's here. Councillor Gatward.
Present.
Full house. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here tonight. Second thing on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, second by Councillor McAlpine, that the County Brant Council agenda for November 17th, 2020 be approved.
All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. Thank you. Number 3 is the declaration of pecuniary interest. I can't imagine there would be one. There's nothing for this part, and we are now at number 5, master plan, servicing plan, and I call on Rob Walton, please, to introduce our presenter.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. Tonight we have Julian Bell from GM Blue Plan to present the project. I'm going to do a few introductory comments. This is a very important project, certainly befitting of a special meeting. We'll be proposing over $100 million of projects over the next 10 to 20 years in Paris because of this, the works required to support development and the existing infrastructure in Paris. It seems that the last plan was not done that long ago in 2016, but there's been so many changes and so much pressure for development from different properties that it was necessary to do this just to have the proper planning for this go forward position. And coming up, we're just starting on the transportation master plan update, and it's in the same position. It was done recently too, and it needs to be updated to make sure that we've got everything ready for what we need to do in the next 10 to 20 years. This project has been on the go for 2 years, and staff from many departments have contributed to this, but in particular, development services staff and planning staff have been working with operations on this, worked very hard on it. We didn't anticipate this was going to take 2 years when we started, but the time that was required to do it was required because first of all, COVID certainly has set us back a little bit. But in the last 6 months, we've worked at a couple of things of knowing what developments are being proposed in areas and having more issues known on them, and then calibrating the plan to fit what's out there and make it better, and in a couple of cases way more practical for what we propose to do in the future. So that's just a little bit of intro, and I'll pass it over to Julian, who I see is on the screen there. And welcome, Julian, and thank you.
All right. Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for having me today. I believe I have a presentation to kind of walk through and introduce the Paris Master Servicing Plan update. So I believe, Heather, you were going to put it up. So as Rob introduced me, I'm Julian Bell. I'm with GM Blue Plan. I was the project manager for the water, wastewater, and stormwater master servicing plan update. I have been working with the county of Brant since, I would say, 2014 on a variety of water and wastewater infrastructure projects. And so this here project was has been the culmination of many years of experience and a lot of hard work from my team and a lot of input and hard work from county staff as well. Next slide, please. So I guess the first question is, what is a master servicing plan? So it's essentially, it's a document that will help establish the county's long-term vision, guiding infrastructure decisions as it relates to the water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure needs across the Paris settlement area. What's important within every single master plan is essentially setting the vision that the plan is trying to undertake or achieve throughout the process. So as part of this master servicing plan, we established that the vision was to achieve a cost-effective water, wastewater, and stormwater system, but also that met the need of existing users, regulatory needs, and legislative requirements, but also supported growth, maintained or improved level of service. So this is, pressures and flows and sewer capacities. Another one was improve the resiliency and operational flexibility of the system. So how can the system be more resilient? And then the last component was making sure that we're considering the long-term financial viability of the system. Next slide, please. So some of the questions were why are we undertaking the master servicing plan? Why at this time, and why in this format? So as Rob mentioned earlier, growth needs within the Paris settlement area have been quite substantial over the last couple of years. And so when you look at what was projected for growth in the last master servicing plan versus this one, there's a substantial increase in growth needs and planning for that growth. Second concept is there was a bit of a different approach. This approach looked at how can we better manage the system overall, so managing supply needs, treatment needs, trunk infrastructure needs, and helping guide the servicing of development areas a little more efficiently. So we're ensuring that we're getting the best overall system for all users, both existing and future users. And then some of the other ones were related to planning for build out. So in the past, when we're getting development applications, we're getting a piecemeal approach. And so now this one's looking at how can we look at build out of the system as a whole. So again, we can plan for future needs and come up with the best overall strategy that meets both current and our future needs. And the last component is, how much is this going to cost? How are we going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for it? So what's the appropriate long-term financial plan for this? And so we can identify those capital projects for the next 10 or 20 years, as well as help feed into projects that are development charge recoverable. Okay, next slide, please. So this master plan was also undertaken under the municipal Class EA process. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Class EA process, it's essentially a systematic approach that ensures that when we're considering needs and evaluating options, that we are considering the full range of potential solutions, and that when we do evaluate those solutions, we are considering not only technical and cost, but we're also considering environmental, social, cultural, potential impacts, benefits, as well as incorporating the potential impacts or adaptation to climate change within our solutions and our evaluations. So as a result of that, you can see on this slide here, there's a pretty straightforward identifying problem opportunities, identifying potential solutions, evaluating those solutions, going to the public to get their feedback on those solutions, and ultimately defining the preferred solutions and the implementation thereof. Next slide, please. This slide here tries to give further depth to all the things that were considered when we were considering and evaluating various alternatives for the stated issues and needs within the Paris system. So for each identified issue, ultimately through this master servicing plan, we identified the full range of potential solutions that would address that issue. And then those solutions were evaluated independently across these environmental, technical, financial, and social cultural factors. And once each one was evaluated independently, they were then compared against each other or evaluated against each other to ultimately find the best overall solution, which addresses the needs for both existing system as well as the long-term needs of the system. Next slide, please. So also throughout this process, through the master servicing plan, there was a public consultation process. Through this master servicing plan that involves the notice of commencement that went out in late 2018. And then those followed by the Public Information Center, which was held in 2019, in where the preliminary preferred recommendations were presented to the public. Since that time, we've had some feedback from staff, some refinement, and some feedback from the public, and further refinement to come up to this final recommended strategy, which is what's being presented here at this council presentation. And then following this council presentation, we will do the 30-day public review period, in where the full document, the master servicing plan document, will be available to the public for review and comment. And once that's been completed, we can finalize it and file the document with the MECP. And then the county then can proceed to utilize this document as their guiding planning document moving forward. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about growth. So planning for growth and managing growth is a major component of this master servicing plan, and it's a major driver for a significant number of the capital projects and the triggering of those projects. So one of the challenges with growth, or the challenge with growth, is that there's a general uncertainty as to when and where. So when we look at growth over the next 20 years, we can be generally clear on 20 years from now, we generally know how much growth will happen, but we don't know where it's going to happen. So it's going to all happen in the south first, then happen in the north. Will it go east or west? Which pocket will develop first? And also, which rate will it happen? Will it be very fast to start and then slow down, or will it be slow then fast? So that can often be a big challenge in master servicing plans. So for this one, our focus was not so much to fixate on a specific year growth approach, but to look at what is the build out potential within the Paris settlement area, and what would we need to do to service the full settlement boundary. And then once we know what that plan is, we can then appropriately react to various development applications. If we have a development application in the south, we already know what the strategy is to service the full build out of the south. So we know what's needed and what triggers those needs. So that allows us a lot more flexibility in how we build and plan for the infrastructure. What it'll also do is it'll identify infrastructure pieces that are supporting the system as a whole, and then those ones can be identified more on a calendar basis as opposed to a development growth trigger. And then also from this approach, it allows us to come up with an overall capital program and identify which of those projects are growth-based and can be potentially recovered through development charges, and which of those projects are really for system resiliency or operational improvements to existing users, which then are potentially funded through other sources. Next slide, please. So this slide here shows the Paris settlement area boundary and the full extents of the growth areas that were considered within the master servicing plan. So this is the growth projections as they were identified in February 2019. So as you can recognize, growth is a changing process, but we need to pick a starting point for the basis of our plans. So all the plans here are based off the 2019 growth projections. And so you can see that it is accounting for the full build out of essentially all the remaining lands within the settlement area boundary. Next slide, please. This one here, this table provides a bit of an overview of the population growth as well as the employment flows and demands that were accounted for within this build out scenario. So within the master servicing plan, we're looking to accommodate an additional 17,045 people within the settlement area boundary. When we look at that from terms of flow rates. It's more than doubling the existing flows that are already within the Paris system. And then on top of that, on top of those 17,000 people, we're also looking to accommodate an additional 360 hectares of employment lands. Within the context of this master servicing plan, we looked at two growth scenarios. One was where we would have the full population build out, as well as an allocation for employment growth on top of that. And then we have a full build out scenario, which is all of the build out of all the employment lands and the residential lands at the full criteria allowance that the county has within their development standards. All right, next slide, please. So what this slide here, so one of the most important components of the Paris water system is its supply. If we need to supply water to the users for consumption. So what this slide here and what this table here shows is tries to demonstrate what our current supply capacity is within the Paris water system and what our projected water demand needs are over the long term. So graphically, the red solid line represents a hard line on this is how much water we have available to supply in the Paris water system. The red dashed line below that's 80% of that number. And the reason we look at that 80% number is because it takes time to bring new supply on board. And so typically when we pass the 80% of available supply and we know we're needing to bring new supply sources online, that's when we start the process to secure that additional supply so that when the new users come on board, that supply will be in place by the time we cross that capacity. So, and the green line here shows the projected supply needs over time. So starting at today, when we have approximately 91.8 liters a second of demand versus 200 liters of capacity. And that when we look at our capital planning horizon, we're going to be exceeding our available supply capacity by about 26%. And then when we look at our build out capacity, we're going to be exceeding that by 77%. Maybe if you just click on the next couple slides, there's a few graphics that will show up on this one. So yeah, again and again. So you can see, if you click again, so you can see here that there is a projected supply deficit. And if you click again, so there's approximately, when we're looking at February 2019, there's approximately 7,300 people growth available before we trigger that 80%. And based off of some growth projections from the DC, that's about 2026. And then if you click again, Heather, and then there's approximately about 11,600 equivalent people growth plus the employment allocation on top of that before supply capacity, additional supply capacity needs to come online to meet the remaining amount of growth. Okay. So if we go to the next slide. So as part of this master servicing plan, we did look at a broad range of potential supply options. So we looked at, what about a new surface water source from the Grand River, a few other potential options, water conservation. And then ultimately we've identified two potential water supply strategies for the Paris water system. The first strategy is securing an additional groundwater source, likely within the northern area of Paris, likely outside of Paris to the north, and then integrating that into the existing Gilbert water supply, water treatment in the north end. This approach is favorable because again, it's a County of Brant solution. It helps integrate your existing northern supply sources. So there's two now, so it'll be a third one, bring them into one consolidated facility. So it can consolidate treatment, storage, pumping. There's a lot of benefits of that. And then it generally allows you to maintain your existing system configuration. So it plugs into your existing system more effectively. Some of the challenges with it, it's going to be 7 to 10 years to bring this new source online. And then there's a high level of unknowns. Groundwater sources are somewhat inconsistent. So there's going to be a number of hydrogeological studies and well testing and investigations that are needed to even confirm that that supply is available before that we can even bring it online. The second supply option that was considered is trying to tie into or get a supply agreement with the city of Brantford. So the city of Brantford's water system with planned expansions over the next couple of years is going to come right up to Power Line Road on the southeast end of Paris with a trunk sewer to service some of the growth areas in Brantford. So there's an opportunity to potentially tie into the Brantford system to supply that supply shortfall. Some of the benefits of that one is there's a higher known, the supply is known. Brantford has a supply source they're pulling from the Grand River, so there's the capacity is there. It's more of what infrastructure is needed in Brantford to connect to that, what agreements are there, and there's also some challenges related to water treatment. The county and the city use slightly different methods to treat their water, so bringing that on board does create some operational issues that would need to be managed. But some of the advantages of this one is this is potentially a shorter term implementation. So the master servicing plan doesn't make a final recommendation on either of these two options because there's still the appropriate investigations and agreements and negotiations with the city that would need to be undertaken. But what we have done is we've prepared capital programs for both options. So both options capital programs have been prepared and are presented today. Next slide, please. Similar to the water system, on the wastewater treatment is also the is the single most expensive and critical piece of infrastructure within the Paris system. And this slide here, similar to the water slide, shows the available treatment capacity at the plant, which represented by the solid red line. And the green line represents the projected treatment needs over the long term. So Heather, if you just want to click on the slide a few more times. Yeah, so again, similar to the water system, when we project our treatment needs over the long term, we are seeing a treatment deficit as well. If you click on 2 more times, Heather. So here, what we're seeing is actually there is less treatment capacity available than there is supply capacity. So there's approximately 4,500 people plus equivalent employment growth that are available within the existing treatment capacity before we trigger that 80% for the planning. And then there's approximately 7,700 people plus the employment allocation on top of that before we utilize that available treatment capacity. Next slide, please. For the Paris, for treatment at the Paris pollution plant, pollution control plant, fortunately, all the existing infrastructure already drains to the plant. And when we look at the configuration of the plant, as well as the available land that the county already owns, the county already owns a parcel of land next to the plant that is 2 times the size of the existing plant, which allows us capacity to expand the existing plant at that location. So, and also because of the modular nature of the wastewater treatment plants, there's the ability to expand these treatment needs in kind of a staged approach, expanding it as we need it. But we can see that that over the long term, there's the potential that we may need to more than double the capacity of the existing wastewater treatment plant to meet the full build-out needs within the Paris system. Okay. So that gives us an overview of our supply and treatment challenges within the Paris system. So we'll go to the next slide. So here, now moving away from supply and treatment, look at the systems themselves. So this is the Paris water system. So an interesting thing about Paris is because of your topography. So with the Nith Valley and the Grand River Valley and the high areas and the low area downtown, the water system within Paris is actually fairly complex for the size of the community. So there's 4 different pressure zones. There's multiple pump stations, multiple storage elements. So it just creates a generally more complex system to manage. And because of that, it requires some larger or greater number of pump station and storage elements as compared to other systems of a similar size if they were on a, say, more flat or consistent topography. Some of the challenges or constraints of the Paris water system is because of the nature of the way that it was built over time, there's really only one kind of linear trunk system. So in many water systems, we try to create looped systems so that there's resiliency and redundancy because we're planning for both users, but also fire protection. And although there's a lot of local looping within the Paris system, there isn't a true trunk loop within the system. We're really on a single branch trunk system. And so as a result of that, there's a few water crossings that are some real choke points within the overall water system. And when we look at needs over the long term, we don't see a lot of local system issues. A lot of the challenges and the needs long term for the Paris water system are focused on that trunk infrastructure and how do we get water from our few sources to those large growth areas. So if we go to the next slide, please. So as we were going through the master servicing plan, we on the water system, we really looked at an increasing level of servicing approach. So we looked at from the water system, first level is, what is the bare minimum amount of infrastructure that we would need to service all of the growth and meet our minimum servicing requirements? And then from there, we'd layer on, okay, what if we want to then also add some layers of security and then add some additional operational flexibility, and then all the way going down to, so the top figure on the right shows this is the bare minimum. And then on the bottom figure on the right shows, what if we wanted to loop every single trunk within the system? So we got full redundancy on everything. So you can see there's quite a full range or an extent of concepts that were considered. And then ultimately, through the evaluation process, it was found that the third one down, so let's optimize the system and add some resiliency and some growth flexibility, was the preferred recommendation. So if we go to the next slide, this one here gives a general overview of what those infrastructures needs are for the Paris water system to meet the full build out. And this one here is under the Brantford supply approach. And you can see that the main needs is really increasing the trunk capacity from the Gilbert water system treatment plant in the north end down, Grand River Street, and then bringing it out to the south. Are some of the main needs. And then in this approach, as we're bringing water from Brantford, we're having to see on the east side, you can see those green and red pipes really bringing water from Brantford back into the Paris system. And then as well in the south, we can see all those water mains, which are really related to the trunk looping within those expansion areas to the south and around the Highway 403. If we go to the next slide, this gives an example of, this shows what would be happening if we had a new supply source in the north and expanded in the Gilbert water treatment plant. And what we can see is a lot of the issues with conveying water from the north to the south and servicing of the south are still the same. What's different is what's happening on the east. So as opposed to having large trunks coming from Brantford and into Paris, this one here is really how can we get more water from Gilbert over to those employment lands in the east. And what's also proposed on here is right now there's only really one substantial trunk servicing the system east of the Grand River. And so under this approach, there's bringing in a second trunk main to add that resiliency or security of supply to the lands onto the east. And also because of the way the topography is it actually helps to reduce some of the pumping and energy consumption within the water system under that approach. So we'll go to the next slide. So this one here gives an overview of the Paris wastewater system. This one is different than as compared to the water system. So in the water system, a lot of the issues were on the trunk level. On the wastewater system, a lot of the trunk sewers are actually in good condition with capacity to meet most of the growth, as well as most of the pump stations. So a lot of the challenges are related to local issues and the impacts of servicing those new growth areas. And then again, similar, the topography is at play here. Because of the topography, a lot of these growth areas actually drain away from the existing sewer system. So there's a lot of new pump stations that are needed to bring those growth areas and pump them into the existing sewer infrastructure. So we can go to the next slide. Here on the water system, the wastewater system, this map here shows a general strategy of the infrastructure needs to service the growth areas. So as you can see, it's not as extensive as the water system, but what we do see is a lot of the pump stations. So you see these green squares in the northwest, on the northeast, the southeast, the south. So there's several new pump stations that are needed to service all of these new growth areas, and then the cascading impacts thereof. What's also accounted for in the strategy is that there's a large portion of lands on the east side of Paris that are currently serviced from local septic systems. So the servicing strategy has accounted for those areas coming on to the municipal sewer system. Okay, go to the next slide. Lastly, we looked at stormwater. So the last master servicing plan did go more in depth on the local stormwater needs for within the existing system. So this master servicing plan focused predominantly on the stormwater needs for the expansion areas. So what was done in the past was each individual development application would come up with their own stormwater management plan, looking at their lands and their lands alone. So this approach here was looking at all of the build out lands and identifying where did it make sense to come up with consolidated or integrated stormwater management strategies. So does it make sense to service 2 development areas with a single stormwater pond to make it a better overall strategy? And also help to identify, some of the challenges where we have existing legal outlet issues or potential challenges related to the MTO or GRCA, to come up with an overall guidance and vision for what's the best overall servicing approach from a stormwater perspective for all of these expansion lands. So if we go to the next slide, this one here gives a general overview of future expansion lands where we see it makes sense to have the stormwater management ponds and their outlets, and where it makes sense to joint management of various development areas. And so that's all further laid out in the master servicing plan. If we go to the next slide. So finally, at the end of the day, through all this evaluation, we did come up with capital programs recommendations for the water and wastewater system. We didn't do that for the stormwater system because a lot of those projects would be undertaken by the developers themselves, as more of identifying where developers should be working together and some of the issues that they should be managing. And so for the water and wastewater system, what we also did was we identified what these projects are doing, who are they servicing, are they solely supporting new development areas, or all the way down to are they purely addressing existing deficiencies within the system? So we've got various classifications, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and those all represent different levels of growth-related triggering versus existing system and existing users related needs. And so ultimately, we came up with a water program, and the cost of the water program depends on whether we're getting a groundwater source or a Brantford source. And so the Brantford source water system is just under $50 million, whereas the groundwater source is approximately $68 million. What's not included in these costs are the costs of buying the water from the city of Brantford. So in the Brantford water supply option, you'd have to purchase that water from Brantford, so there's a cost there. In the north groundwater one, you'd have to treat that water, so there's a cost to that. We don't know what those individual costs would be, so this is more of an infrastructure-based cost. And then on the wastewater side, we identified just under $53 million of capital needs to meet those build outs. So two things to remember. I know these are big numbers, and when we add one of the waters plus the wastewater together, it's over $100 million. But this is a program that would take 10 to 20 years to build out. And the rate at some of these projects is really dependent on the rate of growth. So if we're seeing more growth, that will trigger these projects more quickly. If it happens more slowly, there's potential that these projects can roll out over a longer period of time. The other component is we did have these numbers or preliminary numbers when the county was updating their development charges. So a lot of these projects have been factored into those development charges. Okay. So I think this, go to the next slide, please. So that concludes my overview of the master servicing plan. And I think now it opens up to the question period.
Well, thank you very much. Those are big numbers, but it's also a lot of work. It's a lot of expansion. There must be questions. I'm going to, Councillor Miller, you're first, please, then Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think a simple question through you to Mr. Bell. The water, you're saying we either go Brantford or we go Wells on the north side. We don't do both. There's no possibility of doing both and really making sure you've got a resilient system. There's no hybrid system in there anywhere.
Through the mayor to the councillor, that is a possibility, and there's always a possibility that you could use Brantford as an interim solution until you secure a north groundwater source. I think that the key takeaway is there's a water supply crunch when we start layering on all this growth. And then through the various supply options that we evaluated, those two came to the top. And now there's further study, investigations, discussions, and I imagine negotiations that would need to be undertaken to determine which of those two, or if, as you mentioned, both should be pursued.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to my namesake. Don't get many bells on this call, but there we go. Two questions. I thought the presentation was really helpful, really clear. I have one question on water and one on wastewater. On the water side, I like the idea of a Brantford supply because it's got its security of supply, but I would find it very difficult to make a decision today without understanding the capital versus operating cost trade-off. You alluded to it. You talked about the cost of buying water. I have no idea what that would come to and how it would affect the economics of the preferred solution. I don't know whether you're in a place to talk more about it, but maybe that's just the next phase of development.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bell, I think through the master servicing plan, we do identify that there is more investigation that needs to be undertaken because, until we know what water supplies are available in the north, we don't necessarily know what the water treatment needs would be. We don't know how far we'd have to pump it. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to what that water supply cost is, and it may end up costing more to pump and treat that water than it would be to buy it from Brantford. Conversely, you also don't know what cost rate the city of Brantford will charge for that water. So I think at this point, is we've identified those two sources, and really what needs to happen now is to proceed through the investigations and the discussions to find out what those additional operating costs and capital costs would be for those projects. We've put placeholders in the capital program based on our best estimates, but work still needs to be done to confirm and validate those.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very clear answer. I think one of the positives is we seem to have a little bit more time on the water supply side than we do on the wastewater side. And if I understand correctly, wastewater expansion is more pressing. It looks like 2022 is a trigger point. But to get to that point where you reach 100% capacity of what we currently have, it's only about 4 years, if I read the charts correctly. Do we have enough time to go through all the process of EA and design and then build to allow us to be there on time? And if it doesn't, does that then translate into a practical restriction on any further residential development approvals?
Through the mayor to the councillor, so it does take several years to do the EA, the design, and the build. So if you think the EA is 1 to 2 years, the design is 1 to 2 years, construction is 1 to 2 years. So you're looking at 4 to 6 years likely for that type of project. How quickly that's needed really comes down to the rate of growth. So if growth continues to, if you're getting 1,000 people a year, that will eat into that growth more quickly. And if we do exceed that treatment plant capacity, that may restrict the ability to bring additional new users online. The other thing to keep in mind is these growth projections are based off design criteria. So we're assuming a certain population per household. We're assuming a certain water demand or sewage consumption per person. There is a little bit of level of conservatism in those numbers because there's always some uncertainty. So it's possible that, 4,000, after 4,000 people, we reevaluate and there may be some additional capacity because users aren't using as much. So I think it's something that needs to be monitored, but there is the potential that it could hold back growth potential if there are delays in the implementation.
Yeah, I just on your point about the rate of growth, I think your design is based on a datum point of, I think, February 2019. And if you look at the map, I think it's page 8, quite a lot has changed since then, and in a big way. I mean, there are some significant developments that have been approved. So my gut feeling is that we are on a trajectory which is faster than you. Questions, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Pierce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine were kind of, Councillor Miller and Councillor Bell kind of hit on mine. The way I was looking at the, towards Councillor Miller there, my thought was, is there a way to do a hybrid? If we take, for example, you had stated that, Brantford will have their water lines out to Powerline Road. Is it possible to hook into that to supply? We talked earlier about you made point one side of the river to the other side of the river, and I'm just wondering, was there any thought given into that hybrid of supplying some with the water from Brantford and some with the groundwater? But you kind of you answered Councillor Miller there that it wasn't really. It's just the options at this point in time. Did I catch that correctly? There was no further thought given to that.
Through the mayor to Councillor Pierce, we actually did talk about that hybrid approach or a phased approach throughout the master servicing plan. But ultimately the decision was it's premature there's a lot of unknowns that need to be further clarified before we can make a definitive answer. And I would say, either option or both options are available, and we just need to go through the next step processes to help define that.
Okay, thank you for that. And just on the when it spoke of the the cost of purchasing the water and the cost of treating the water, is there no assumptions you could use in your experience that would suggest that they're both relatively equal in cost? Or I'm trying to understand if there's anything we can use for an assumption out there.
I guess at this point, there are numbers we can use as an assumption, but I don't think that we can use those at this stage to definitively confirm or rule out either of those options. I think Rob's got maybe add to this as well.
Walton?
Thank you. Through the mayor to council. A couple of things on this. One is that we do actually have some numbers for Brantford because we are a customer of theirs already. So we can do some calculations of that. But in phases 3 and 4 of the A, which we'll have to undertake for many of these projects, we would look into it further before we actually implement the projects and come back to council for further approval. One problematic thing with the hybrid approach to connecting to Brantford and doing the North Supply is that if Brantford and use chlorination like the county, that would be an easier solution. But since they chloraminate their water, we do have to have a cutoff point as to where we're supplying from one and where we're supplying to the other. If they were the same, there probably would be a good interim solution where we just bought some water from them, and that probably would be a lot easier. But that is made much more difficult by the different treatment used by both systems. So I think in the next phases of this, we'll go a lot further into this, and then we'll quickly be making some decisions. I think that this plan is great because it gives us some flexibility going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
just my final point is the fact that I'm absolutely on the same page as Councillor Bell there, in the sense that with our growth, there's nothing going slow at this point in time, and I think our number one feat here is going to be the wastewater. I think that the point in time which we suggested for that is going to come at us a lot quicker than what we thought. Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Mr. Walton, you want to respond to that?
Just through to council, you'll note from the budget presentations that we do propose to get started with the Class CA for this. And as talked before at council, we have actually started work on the assimilative capacity, which is a big component of getting ready for the Class CA. So we're certainly doing that. The interesting thing in Paris is that right now, our average day, we're really only at around 60% of the plant capacity. So although those theoretical numbers take us very quickly towards the plant capacity, the numbers we're seeing on some of the commercial industrial development actually are much lower than what's in our the reality of what's happening. So if we landed a big food processing plant or whatever, we would get to that point much faster than we will if we end up with a lot of logistics going into those and very low flows. So there's a lot of variables here. We're not at 80 or 85% of the plant capacity, not even close to it right now. So I think that we're not in a bad position right now. We're already doing pre-work towards that Class CA, and we are proposing to get started at it. So I think we're in a good position.
Thanks, Rob. Councillor Gatward, you're next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Part of my first question was answered, I believe. And if I understood Rob correctly, Julian had mentioned about the city's water system being treated differently than the counties, and Rob mentioned chlorination. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly, but that's what the city uses, and we don't use that in our water systems. I believe all our water systems are consistent. So, Julian, you said it could be managed. How would it be managed? That's my first question.
Right, through the mayor to the councillor. So essentially the difference is both use chlorine. It's just Brantford adds ammonia as well to make the chloramination. And so how that's managed is essentially by creating kind of a hard barrier or a barrier between the area that is serviced with the chloramine and the area that is serviced with the chlorine. And so that's one approach, and that's approach that the region of Waterloo utilizes. They have different portions of their system are used different treatments. If there's also another option, which would be to transition the Paris system to chloramination. So there's the Norths, Gilbert, Telford, and Bethel, and transitioning those to chloramination. And that's really dependent on, if we really do have large demands and we're not able to successfully, just supply the east half of Paris with Brantford water and the rest of the half with the groundwater, and we need to transfer more supply into it, then that's when we would look into doing a treatment transition. And that's something that, again, other communities have done over time. And I know that that's actually something the region of Waterloo is going to be undertaking for a portion of the Cambridge water system in the next year or so to kind of manage some of this water transfer between different treatment zones.
So thank you for that answer. So the hard barrier could be, for instance, for the east part of the Paris area, and it would be a separate system from the rest of our county systems.
Through the councillor through the mayor to the councillor. Yeah, it's so the Paris water system is already segregated or separated into pressure zones. So there's 4 pressure zones within the Paris water system, and they can almost be seen as separated systems. And so in this approach is you would essentially have the zone 4, which is the zone on the east, which would be serviced from Brantford. And that's kind of, and then the other 3 zones could be serviced off the chlorine under that, and that's one potential configuration. There's 2 or 3 other management options that could be used to manage these different treatment types.
Thank you for that. My last question is an easy one. Zone 3, you're proposing a pressure in the pressure zone 3, excuse me, you're proposing an elevated tank. When I looked at it on the map, is that at the Bethel well site?
Through the mayor to the councillor, we're proposing a tank. We haven't specified an exact location for that water tower. It would need to be somewhere in the zone 3 area. And then ultimately either an EA study and another environmental assessment would need to be undertaken to potentially site that tank, or there's other alternative means if the county is able to secure the lands appropriately in advance to site that tank. So the location hasn't been definitively identified yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferrier, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, and I guess perhaps to staff more broadly, maybe it's more of a recommendation, but it pains me to say this, but I wonder if we might be able to get a legal brief from our solicitor or somebody connected to our solicitor about how water contracts work with other municipalities, because I worry about the Brantford option, because and it's controversial to say this, but whatever. I'm born and raised there. I'll say what I please, but I feel like there's issues with the potential of having our water held hostage by another municipality, especially one that can sometimes look at us as a county as a cash cow or a piggy bank. And I worry about that. I've seen partnerships repeatedly this term, and it might just be an issue of this term, get renegotiated or recalibrated or whatever word we want to use repeatedly again and again. And it's hard to think about that kind of partnership on that kind of level. And that's all political. None of it's to do with any staff on our end or their end or anything like that. So I worry about that. And I'd like to know every in and out possible about something like that before we were to decide on it, to know when something could get renegotiated, how much is there provincial oversight into how much rates can be raised and at what time, and that sort of thing. And maybe that's a Rob Walton question, but it may be a solicitor question. I'm not sure. But I have very strong worries about the potential to be held hostage on our urban settlement boundary for water.
Thank you, Councillor. Rob, do you want to answer that or comment to Mark's concerns?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Ferrier. The county actually already is a customer of Brantford for the whole Kingsville water system, so we do have a precedence there, and we actually have agreement with the city to expand the water and wastewater systems in both Cairnsville and the airport areas. So I think there already is some negotiations going on and some agreements there, or there are. I'm involved with it to deal with that. And the negotiations here would be similar. The sharing of water and wastewater services between municipalities is a common thing in Ontario, and they're usually dealt with through long-term agreements because water and wastewater is not something that you certainly when you have these sort of agreements, under the Ontario Water Resources Act, the province actually has powers to deal with matters of water supply and wastewater if people were threatening to not follow through on their agreements. So I think that we could bring back a report on this, and we certainly can input from our solicitor on that to give you further information on that. It's always peace of mind for any municipality to be in total control of your infrastructure. There's no doubt about that. But sometimes the cost of that is just not practical, and that's where you would look for the partnerships. So we can certainly provide more information than that, but I think that's the starting.
Well, I'd love to be able to partner in good faith through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff. I want assurances, and I want to know every potential hazard and trip hazard that could happen along the way for not just this council, but generations ahead. So that's on that. I think CAO Bradley may want to speak to this, but I'm not sure. I do have another question after.
All right, Michael, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And Rob mentioned this, but we do have an outstanding water agreement that still has to be negotiated, completed negotiation and presented to the two councils for Cairnsville. So I think through that process, which would happen likely before we get into this process, we could help council understand some of the benefits and risks and challenges to that with some input from our solicitors. So that's all I was going to add.
Councilor Ferrier?
Thank you. And through you, my second question is likely to Rob. I know the answer to this question, but it's a question I get, and I say it with a little editorialization again, that we need to care more about our water than an extra 10 minutes in traffic. But I've had people say to me, well, you're going to spend $100 million on this, but not on a bridge. Can you just address that concern? I know there's so many valid explanations as to why one and not the other, and the trip points, and that we have a report coming, but it's something that gets asked privately, and I'd like it sort of on the record at some time. It doesn't have to be today, but
Through the Mayor to Councilor Ferrier, different facets of infrastructure can't necessarily compete with one another for popularity. They're all required. And unfortunately, we aren't really allowed to accept an asset management. We're being put in a better point of looking at our assets together and what's required and what our ability to build and operate them, and apart from just taking on what developers give us. A lot of what we're talking about here will be paid for by people buying houses and paying development charges. Sort of lost my train of thought. the time announcement, anyways. So, but I think through things like asset management are where we're going to get to that point in a way better scenario where we understand we're looking at all of the assets on the balance sheet. This is what we should be doing in the county, and not just hard assets, but soft assets and community and protective services assets, and fire halls and all of those other things. It all adds onto the ledger. It all adds costs. We need to be thinking of all of them.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the thorough and thoughtful answer.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers, and then Councillor House, please.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. I have two questions. The first question goes like this. A few years ago now, one of the city councilors proposed to his council at a council meeting by resolution that they consider providing and selling water in addition to the Canesville area to the city or to the county of Brant and it was flatly rejected. And my question is, has the city provided any recent comments about this option?
Mr. Walton.
Through the mayor to Council Chambers, these options have only been discussed so far at a staff level with the city, so there has not been any requested resolution. Certainly, we would have to develop our proposals further to get into those more in-depth discussions. Saying that, there are the negotiations currently ongoing with the new water agreement, as CAO Bradley has stated, that stems from the boundary adjustment agreement, and that is currently ongoing.
I'm wondering if CAO Bradley can comment on that, because I'm sure he remembers when the city was flatly rejecting that idea.
Mr. Bradley.
So thank you. Through you, Your Worship. I've had discussions with my counterpart on this, and I think we agreed that there's a number of things. There's some agreements to the boundary adjustment, or some commitments to the boundary adjustment for water and wastewater in different parts of the county. There's some need for the county for potential some water in Paris, and then there's probably some other needs that the city might have from us. And so I think what our thought was is that we should probably approach these holistically sometime over the next 12 months or so. Look at all of the different needs, look at all of the outstanding agreements and outstanding commitments, and then work out a lack of a better term, omnibus agreement for some of these things that both of our municipalities need and that we can deliver effectively. So I think that's probably what my thought is, and I think my counterpart agreed with that at the city. To Councillor Chambers' point, I do think some of those discussions did fall into the pre-boundary adjustment agreement era, and times are more complicated by then. I do believe, however, that there's advantages to both municipalities to work together and help us each other where our economies of scale can benefit one another. So those are my thoughts, Your Worship.
And hopefully the boundary adjustment agreement will pave the way for this kind of joint options. My last question is related to the presentation. The first page actually identifies why we establish a master plan to achieve a cost-effective water, wastewater, and stormwater system that meets the needs, et cetera. One of the items is that it supports growth. So my question to the presenter is, you say that it supports growth. Why is it incorrect to say that it manages growth?
I guess through the mayor to the councillor, the plan that we're coming up with is the infrastructure that we need to support the build out of the Paris master servicing system. Any items related to growth allocation and the timing of those projects to support growth is really more of a staff level and council level decision. So the plan that we've prepared is can we support growth? And then I think beyond that, it's more to the county to determine how they roll out that plan to manage growth if necessary or so desired.
The reason I ask that question is there may be the perception that this plan is a tool to regulate and manage growth, and it's not, if I understand it correctly.
Through the mayor, the councillor, this is the plan to identify this is the infrastructure that's needed to support the build out of growth within the county, within the Paris settlement area. Any restrictions on growth or timing of those projects is really how those projects get funded and rolled out. And this document doesn't put restrictions on that beyond identifying this is the infrastructure needed. and this is the amount of growth or flow that triggers those needs.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Howes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I think my question is probably going to be aimed more towards Rob Walton as opposed to Mr. Bell. I really appreciate this presentation. I found it easier to absorb the information listening to the presentation compared to reading through the document on its own, which leads to my question, which is about communication. This is such an important topic, and I know that it's a topic of interest for a lot of people who live here. And as we head into the 30-day public review portion, which would be the next stage after tonight, assuming we vote this through, I'm thinking about the public information session that I attended at the fire hall back in 2019. We did not get a lot of people out to that information session. I'm not sure we had enough people there to field a baseball team. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to connect with our communications department or something to make this information not just easily available, but easily absorbable for the general public. I've had people ask me, people that pay taxes in our community, I've had them specifically say to me, why is growth being allowed to continue when there's a perception that we're heading to some limitations and some capacity issues? And I'm relieved to hear Rob Walton tell us that the capacity issues may not be as severe as they seem. But I'm just wondering, what steps do we have in mind in order to achieve the public review part of this in an effective way? Thank you.
Mr. Walton.
Through the mayor to Councillor Howes. Those are very interesting questions that you put forward. I've been in this business for quite some period of time, and I've gone to a lot of meetings on master plans, like the one that was held in the summer of 2019 with the doors of the fire hall up, and a nice night it was, beautiful night that it was, and we fielded less than 2 handfuls of people from the public at that meeting. That's not uncommon. Mostly where you get people out to meetings like this is where they see something that directly affects them. And, the directly affects them here is more what the development is going to be rather than, what it's going to cost them or what it's going to do to their taxes, because a lot of this is going to be from development charges. So it's difficult to engage people on these projects. And you're absolutely right. The document which we will provide to the public to review is difficult enough for people that have knowledge in the industry to consume, because it's so big that it's difficult for the average person to do it. So certainly we can work with the communications department and make well available the presentation which happened tonight through the website, as well as the other information, which is the full binder, which will be like, where we print it out, it'll be 2 inches thick. At least. So we can do that. We'll be going through the required stages of advertising as required by the EA process, and through the website and through with communications, we'll do our best to get this information, which was here presented tonight, available to the public as well. And then clearly we're able to answer any questions as people have them, either through councilors or through their direct contact with us.
Thank you. That answers your question, Councillor Howes?
I think so, yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, back to Rob. Thanks, Rob. I do think that there's an appetite for this information, but I think that the the challenge and the opportunity for us is to find a way to create some kind of an at a glance short version that's a little easier for people to absorb. So I look forward to seeing staff efforts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions to the presenter? Councillor Walton or Mr. Walton, you want to speak?
Yeah. This is late in this project, but council does know that the county has purchased the software Bang the Table for future community engagement. And I think that will be a huge step forward for us in how we can interact with the public in new and different ways and give them more ability to have, presentations like this and whatever easily accessible to them in the future. So we look forward to learning as we get that. And I did make an inquiry about that today because we had a meeting about the upcoming Burford study and whether this software would be ready for us. And come the end of the first week in December, we'll be have the ability to be using it. Clearly, there's a big learning curve on that and how we implement it. But I think going forward, that's a very positive step forward for us. Too late for this project, but as I say, I don't think that this project's a lot like many other master servicing plans are done. We'll do our best through the public consultation period to get the information out, which we had tonight for council. And hopefully lots of people watch this on YouTube as well.
Councillor Gatward, please.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. Through you to Rob Walton, the elevated tank, I know how long it took for the Oak Hill tank. Is this an absolute necessity for the 403 area, this tank and the industrial growth down in that area, or the residential growth? Or how soon is it proposed that we would need that tank? And it's a shame that it couldn't be included in this process and this EA, because now we have to do a separate one. Can you comment on that, please?
Mr. Walton, please.
Through the mayor to Councillor Gatward. So under master plan, you're actually only doing phases 1 and 2 of the EA process. So to site an elevated tank or other structures like that, we would either have to do phases 3 and 4, or through the planning process, obtain the land and show in the planning process for that area that it's going to be. So if there's some future planning done in the area where we're going to need this, we certainly can be approaching developer, look for that property and talk about it then, and not then have to do the phases 3 and 4. The need for this tank is probably a long ways out, longer than the 20 years. It's being identified as a future need. What would elevate the need for it is if we got a big water user there in the future, or somebody that needed huge fire flows or something like that, that would put the demand out faster than what we see right now. Right now, I don't believe that that's shown as a very future thing, not necessarily even in the 20-year time frame. And Julian, you help me out if I got that wrong, but I believe that that is the case.
Yeah, so that project's borderline under the capital program scenario. So again, we looked at 2 scenarios. It's borderline under the capital program scenario, and it really gets triggered in the full build out scenario. And then again, the need for the water tower is predominantly if we get high employment flows within the south end of Paris. We've kept it and included it in the master servicing plan because it does add additional flexibility in servicing, and that we'd like to ensure that it's appropriately captured and costed in the long-term planning, and also provides the county an opportunity to acquire those lands through a means external to the EA, such as the planning process, if an opportunity does present itself in the next 10 to 20 years.
Thank you,
Great,
Mr.
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not going to worry now.
I thought you'd be cutting the ribbon, Councillor Gatward. Are there any other?
I could be around in 20 years.
Well, don't threaten me. Are there any other questions to the presenter, please? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Bell, for coming and speaking to us tonight. It is much better when you come and speak to us and then to get a big stack of papers and try to sort through them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess if that's it, we're going to move on to number 5B on the agenda, please, Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce, that council approve the Paris Master Servicing Plan Update Study Report completed by GM Blue Plan, and that council directs staff to issue the notice of study completion and place the Paris Master Servicing Plan update in a 45-day review period for comment by the public and agencies.
Everybody's clear on that? No more questions, concerns, clarifications? Seeing none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Next meeting, I guess, is Tuesday, November the 24th. 6 o'clock, same format. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay safe. Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Night.